And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, looking at tonight's weather, a lot quieter pattern than what we saw 24 hours previous here, with a weak trough bringing some showers to the North Gulf Coast, mostly the northern panhandle, and pretty dry for Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay. Areas of snow continue with this weak low here just east of Norton Sound, again from Seward Peninsula up to the eastern Arctic coast, and a weak low with some scattered showers for the Aleutians, with the main snow area for the Pribilof Islands, but most of it staying in the central Bering Sea. And for tomorrow, next system here pushing onto the chart there as it stays mostly cloudy with areas of snow, mostly from the Alaska Range northward to the Brooks Range and then off to the eastern Arctic coast. And the next system here just coming onto the chart there pushes into the Aleutians on Thursday afternoon with some gusty winds and rain there for the central Aleutians, spreading into the Fox Islands. This low pulls up into the Gulf of Alaska. Looks like the brunt of this system with the heaviest precipitation and wind will push into the southeast coast and the eastern Gulf of Alaska, some of that working back into the North Gulf Coast though, but fair to the north. And for the coastal water forecast, southeast winds 15 knots for the south coast, central and north coast, looking at south to east winds at 20 knots with seas 11 to 12 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, south-southeast winds at 15, southeast at 10 for Clarence Strait. Big increase in the winds here on Thursday with that strong front coming in. South to southeast winds 40 to 50 knots here for the coast with seas 20 to 30 feet here. And for the Lynn Canal area, full gales, southeast 40 to 45 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast 30 to 45 knots. And gale force southeast winds at 35 knots for Clarence Strait. For the Prince William Sound, tomorrow, southeast wind, 20 knots, seas 4 feet, east at 15 for northern Cook Inlet. South of the Forelands, southeast at 20, Kamishak Bay, and the Barren Islands down in here, looking at southeast winds at 25 knots, and east-southeast winds 25 to 30 knots with 10-foot seas for the North Gulf Coast. And then those winds significantly increase Thursday and Thursday afternoon, looking at north to east winds 50 knots. Storm warnings also for the Barren Islands, north winds at 50 knots. And full gales for Prince William Sound, east winds 45 knots, seas 10 feet. Gale warning southern Cook Inlet, north at 40 knots and 45 knot north winds for Kamishak Bay. Kodiak Island for Wednesday, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, east at 20 for Bristol Bay. And variable winds at 15 to 20 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Then for Thursday, Kodiak Island, west to northwest winds 30 to 45 knots, strongest there for Chillicothe Strait. And we've got south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, west winds 20 to 30 knots for Bristol Bay. Eastern Aleutians, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Wednesday. Adak and Atka, west winds at 20 knots. And the Western Aleutians, variable winds 15 to 20 knots. Western Aleutians on Thursday, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots with northeast winds at 25 knots for the Central Aleutians. And the Eastern Aleutians here looking at south to southeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, east winds 10 to 15 knots out here, northeast at 10 knots for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, south at 20 for the Pribilofs, and northeast at 20 for St. Matthew Island. And for Thursday, southeast winds 25 knots for the Pribilofs, northeast 25 for St. Matthew Island, southwest coast here, north at 15 to 20 knots, while Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, about the same there too, north at 20 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east to northeast winds at 10 knots, the western Arctic coast, northeast at 15. And for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots. Then for Thursday, the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 20 to 30 knots, northeast at 20 for the western Arctic coast, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast looking at east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots.